On the night of April 14, 1912, 1,500 people went into water that was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Below freezing, they did not drown. Most of them froze, screaming, within sight of a ship that was close enough to see and far enough to do nothing. You were taught the ship hit an iceberg. That part is true. It is also the only part of the story that everyone agrees on. What follows is a descent through the Titanic. Not the movie, not the museum exhibit, but the wreck itself, and everything that has been quietly lowered into the dark, alongside it for over a century. We begin at the surface. You think you know we end 12,000 feet down, where the ship is still collecting bodies. The surface of this iceberg is the most famous shipwreck in human history. You know the shape of it before I describe it. The 4 buff and black funnels, the grand staircase under its glass dome, the string quartet that supposedly played as the deck tilted into the sea. The numbers are part of the legend now. 882 feet long, 46,000 tons. The largest moving object ever built by human hands at the time she sailed. A first-class suite cost the equivalent of $100,000 today. Aboard her were some of the richest men alive: John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidore Straus, who owned Macy's. By dawn on April 15th, all 3 of them were dead in the water. The legend says the ship was called unsinkable, that a shipbuilder's magazine wrote that her watertight compartments made her, quote, practically unsinkable. The word practically got lost, the arrogance did not, and the iceberg the world remembers is not the chunk of ice that opened her hull. It is the idea that the proudest machine of the modern age was killed in 4 hours by something cold, blind, and indifferent. This is the tier everyone visits, the movie that made $2 billion, the musical, the museum that hands you a boarding pass with a real passenger's name and tells you at the end whether you lived. This is the water level entry on the iceberg, famous polished safe. Everything below it has been sanded down, struck from a record, or sealed in a vault. We start descending now. Tier 2, the witnesses. Within 2 weeks of the sinking, 2 governments convened official inquiries. 1 American, 1 British. Together, they questioned over 100 survivors and crew. And almost immediately, certain testimony began to vanish. Start with the boiler rooms. The men who survived the bottom of the ship, stokers, trimmers, greasers, the ones shoveling coal when the ice opened the hole, told a strange and consistent story. They spoke of a fire, a coal fire burning in bunker number 6, that had been smoldering since before the ship left Southampton. A fire so hot, the crew had been ordered to shovel the burning coal directly into the furnaces to get rid of it, weakening the very bulkhead that the iceberg would later strike. A coal fire weakening the hull at exactly the point the iceberg tore it open. You would think that would be the headline of the entire inquiry. Instead, the testimony about the fire was heard quietly, minimized, and largely buried. The official cause remained the same: an act of God. A piece of ice. Nobody's fault. Because the alternative, that the ship sailed with a fire already burning in her belly, known to the crew, hidden from the passengers, was not an act of God. It was a decision. Then there is the ship that did nothing, the Californian. A steamer stopped for the night in the ice field, by most accounts less than 20 miles from the Titanic, possibly far closer. Her crew saw rockets in the sky. White rockets fired one after another, the international signal of a ship in distress, and her captain, Stanley Lord, was woken, told about the rockets, and went back to sleep. By the time the Californian moved, the Titanic was on the seabed and the screaming in the water had stopped. Captain Lord spent the rest of his life insisting the lights he saw were a different ship. The inquiries did not believe him. They also never fully pursued him. His career ended, the questions never closed. To this day, no one can say with certainty how many of those 1,500 people died within sight of a vessel whose captain chose to roll over and sleep. And then the lifeboats, the Titanic carried 20, enough for roughly half the people aboard, and she launched many of them less than half full. One boat built for 65 left with 12 people in it. 12. Survivors testified that as people froze and drowned a few hundred yards away, the half-empty boats did not go back. The occupants were afraid the dying would swamp them, so they listened. For an hour they listened, and they did not row toward the sound. This is the second tier of the iceberg, not ice, not fate. People making choices, and then a room full of officials deciding very carefully which of those choices the public would be allowed to remember. It gets darker from here. Tier 3, follow the money. Because every great disaster has a second story, and the second story is always about who got paid. The Titanic was owned by the White Star Line, which was owned, in turn, by an American financier you have heard of, J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in the world. Morgan had a private suite aboard the Titanic for her maiden voyage. a suite with its own promenade deck reserved in his name. And at the last minute, JP Morgan canceled. His official reason was poor health. He was photographed days later in apparent good health with his mistress in the south of France. He was not the only one. Multiple wealthy men with reservations canceled in the final days. Milton Hershey, the chocolate magnate, canceled. George Vanderbilt canceled. The pattern is just clean enough to feel like a signal and just loose enough that no one can prove it was one. And then there is the insurance. The Titanic was insured at Lloyd's of London for £1 million. The claim was paid in full, in cash, within 30 days. Lightning fast, for the largest marine insurance loss in history, at that point no drawn-out dispute, no investigation into negligence delaying the payout. When you destroy the most valuable object on Earth and your check clears in a month, somebody somewhere was extraordinarily well prepared. This is where the conspiracy theory is born, and we will go all the way down into it, lower on this iceberg. But even at this tier, with no conspiracy at all, the cold arithmetic is ugly. The men who built her cut the lifeboats from 48 down to 20 because the full complement, quote, cluttered the deck and frightened the passengers. Aesthetics, they removed the lifeboats for aesthetics. 2,800 people aboard, room in the boats for roughly 1,100, and the deciding factor was that too many lifeboats looked unsightly. The Board of Trade Regulations agreed with them. The law required lifeboats based on a ship's tonnage, not the number of souls aboard, and the law had not been updated in 20 years since before ships like this existed. By the letter of the law, the Titanic carried more lifeboats than required. She was fully compliant, she was fully legal, and she left more than 1,500 people with nowhere to go but the water. Tier 3. The disaster had owners, the owners had lawyers, the lawyers had insurers, and every one of them came out of the freezing water dry. Now we leave the surface entirely. Tier 4, for 73 years, the Titanic was a story without a body. No one knew exactly where she lay. The ocean is enormous, and 12,000 feet is deeper than light has any business reaching. Then, in 1985, a man named Robert Ballard found her. What Ballard did not tell the public for years is why he was really out there. His expedition was funded by the United States Navy. His true mission was to locate two lost nuclear submarines, the Thresher and the Scorpion, and map their wreckage on the seafloor. Finding the Titanic was the cover story. The Navy let him chase with whatever time remained. The most famous shipwreck in history was discovered as a side quest to a Cold War nuclear search. When the cameras finally reached the Titanic, the first thing they found was not the ship. It was the debris field, a mile-wide scatter of the ship's contents across the bottom of the ocean. Bottles of wine, unbroken chamber pots. A child's porcelain doll head staring up from the silt. Pairs of shoes, leather shoes side by side, exactly where a body had come to rest and then dissolved away, leaving only the souls the deep-sea bacteria could not eat. The bow and the stern lie nearly 2,000 feet apart. The ship did not sink whole. She broke in half at the surface, something survivors swore to, and the inquiries refused to officially accept for over 70 years, until the wreck proved them right. The bow plowed into the mud like a spear and is almost recognizable. The stern is a tangle of shredded steel, ripped apart by the violence of its plunge, unrecognizable as a ship at all. And the ship is being eaten. A species of iron-consuming bacteria has formed structures the divers named rusticles, icicles of rust hanging from every surface, dripping iron oxide into the dark. They are devouring her. By the most cited estimates, the recognizable hull of the Titanic may be entirely gone within a few decades. The ocean is digesting the most famous ship in the world, slowly from the inside out. Inside the wreck, the divers reported something they did not expect. Personal effects preserved in pockets of the ship the bacteria had not reached. A bowler hat resting on the floor. A bottle of champagne corked and intact. Lumps of coal. The very coal that may have been on fire when she sank, scattered like black stones across the deck. And in the staterooms, the things people brought with them to start a new life in America, still down there, still in the dark. This tier is real. Photographed, mapped, verified. Everything below it is contested, suppressed, or actively dangerous to discuss. We are going there anyway. Tier 5. This is where the Titanic stops being a museum piece and becomes a grave. Because the thing the documentaries do not dwell on is that the Titanic is a tomb, and the question of what remains inside it has been deliberately closed. Here is the official line: at 12,000 feet under crushing pressure, in oxygen-poor water, human remains do not last. The bodies, the experts say, are gone, dissolved, only the leather shoes remain, marking where each one fell. That is the public story, and for the open debris field, it is largely true. But it is not the whole truth, because no one has ever fully entered the deepest, sealed-off interior compartments of the wreck. the places where in the final minutes hundreds of third-class passengers were trapped behind gates as the water rose. Third-class steerage. The immigrants in the bottom of the ship behind locked gates that were, by multiple survivor accounts, kept shut to control the flow of passengers to the boats. By the time those gates were opened, if they were opened, the water was already in the corridors. The survival rate tells the story without a single witness. First-class women survived at nearly 100%. Third-class children died at a rate of 2 out of 3. The dead of the Titanic were sorted by the price of their ticket. And here is what divers say, quietly off the record, that in the sealed lower compartments, sheltered from the bacteria, and the conditions that destroyed the bodies in the open field, may not apply. That somewhere inside the hull behind collapsed steel, no submersible can pass. The Titanic may still be holding what it took down. No one is allowed to go and check, because in 2012 the wreck site was placed under formal protection. A treaty between governments declared the Titanic a maritime memorial. Salvage was restricted. Entry into the hull was effectively banned. The stated reason is respect for the dead. A noble reason, but the effect is the same as a seal on a vault. Whatever is in the deepest compartments of the Titanic will stay there, undocumented by law. The one place on the wreck that might still hold a body count is the one place no one is permitted to look. And the artifacts that were taken before the ban, over 5,000 of them were raised in the 1980s and 90s jewelry china, a piece of the hull weighing 15 tons. Some collectors and descendants called it grave, robbing others called it preservation. The recovered artifacts are now a corporate asset. When the salvage company went bankrupt, the personal effects of the Titanic's dead were listed in court as property, valued, cataloged, and very nearly sold off lot by lot to the highest bidder. Tier 5, the bodies were sorted by class. The wreck was sealed by treaty. The belongings of the dead were valued by accountants. And the deepest chambers of the Titanic remain, to this day, the most carefully unexamined crime scene on Earth. We descend. Tier 6. Now we go into the theory that mainstream history calls impossible, and that has refused to die for 100 years anyway. The theory that the ship that sank was not the Titanic at all. The Titanic had a sister, an almost identical twin called the Olympic. Same shipyard, same design, launched a year earlier. And the Olympic was a disaster for the company before the Titanic ever sailed. In 1911, she collided with a Royal Navy cruiser, the Hawk. The crash was ruled the Olympic's fault, which meant the insurance would not pay. The Olympic limped back to harbor, damaged, blamed, and financially radioactive, sitting in the same shipyard at the same time as the nearly finished Titanic. The theory goes like this: the company facing ruin from the uninsurable Olympic secretly swapped the two ships. They patched the damaged Olympic, repainted her as the Titanic, and planned to sink her on purpose, in a controlled scuttling, with a rescue ship standing by to take off every passenger and collect the full insurance on the more valuable name. And the rescue ship that was supposed to be standing by, the theory says, was the Californian, the ship full of relief supplies and almost no passengers stopped in the ice, waiting, except the iceberg got there first. The scuttle that was meant to be gentle and survivable became real and fast and fatal. And the rescue ship, for reasons of timing or cold feet, did not move. Is it true? Historians say no, and they have hard evidence. Tiny construction details, the number of portholes on the bow, the spacing of the windows on the promenade, differ between the two ships, and the wreck on the seabed matches the Titanic's plans, not the Olympic's. The switch theory, in its strict form, is almost certainly false. But notice what it requires you to swallow as the ordinary truth. That the lifeboats were cut for looks, that JP Morgan canceled at the last minute, that the insurance paid in 30 days, that a relief ship sat in the ice and watched. The conspiracy is probably wrong. The facts it is built from are all real. There is a darker variant of the theory still, that the sinking was arranged to kill 3 specific men. Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss, 3 of the wealthiest men in the world, were all, the story claims, opponents of the creation of a private central bank in the United States, the Federal Reserve. Less than 2 years after they drowned, the Federal Reserve was founded. The theory says the Titanic was a floating assassination designed to remove the only men powerful enough to stop it. Historians dismantle this one too. The 3 men had no unified position on the central bank. The timing is coincidence stretched to fit a conclusion, but the theory persists for the same reason all of them do. Because the official story asks you to believe that the richest, most powerful men of an entire age were killed by sheer dumb luck and a piece of floating ice. And some part of the human mind simply refuses to accept that the powerful can be erased by an accident. Someone, it insists, must have meant it. Tier 6. The line between disaster and design dissolves down here in the cold, and below the conspiracy is the only tier left, the one that is happening now. the one where the ocean started collecting again. Tier 7, the bottom of the iceberg. Here is where the Titanic stops being history and becomes something that is still actively killing people. Because the wreck has a curse, and the curse is not folklore. It is a body count, and it is rising. For decades, the Titanic was almost unreachable, 12,000 feet down, where the pressure is over 6,000 pounds per second square inch, enough to crush a steel sphere like an empty can. Only a handful of vehicles on Earth could survive the descent. Going to the Titanic was reserved for governments and the world's deepest research submersibles. And then it was opened up for money. In June of 2023, a small private submersible carrying 5 people descended toward the wreck. It was made of carbon fiber, a material the deep-sea engineering community had warned for years was wrong for this. An hour and 45 minutes into the dive, near the depth of the wreck, the vessel lost contact. It did not sink slowly, it did not flood. Under the pressure of the deep ocean, the hull failed all at once in a fraction of a millisecond. An implosion, the 5 people aboard were gone before the sound could reach their own ears. The wreck site was for days the focus of the entire world, and the ocean that took 1,500 people in 1912 had taken 5 more in almost the same spot, reaching for the same ship. But that was not the first time. There is a longer, quieter list. People connected to the Titanic who met strange ends. The list, the curse believers keep. The explorer who found the wreck and spoke of how the ocean does not give up its dead easily. The wealthy adventurer who dove to the Titanic and then died in a separate, unrelated deep-sea accident years later. The descendants of survivors who said the ship followed their families like a shadow. Coincidence, every one of them if you want it to be. But the pattern seeking part of your brain has already started counting, the same way it counted the canceled tickets and the 30-day insurance check. And it has noticed that everyone who reaches too eagerly for this particular wreck seems to pay the ocean a price. At the very bottom of every iceberg chart, the labels stop being facts and become questions. What is still sealed inside the hull? How many of the unrecovered 1,500 are truly gone? And how many are simply unlooked? For behind locked third class gates the law now forbids us to open. Whether the bacteria will finish eating the ship before anyone is ever allowed to find out. And whether the thing we call a curse is anything more than the ocean doing what it has always done, keeping what falls into it, and asking a toll from anyone who comes to take it back. The official story is that the Titanic hit an iceberg, sank, and was found, and that everything since has been preservation and memory. The deeper story is that she sailed with a fire in her belly, too few boats by choice, her dead sorted by class, her grave sealed by treaty, and her name still pulling people down into the dark 110 years later. 12,000 feet down, the most famous ship in the world is still there. Still rusting, still collecting. The Titanic you were taught about is a thin sheet of legend over a body of water that goes down farther than the official record will follow. At the surface, the unsinkable ship and the night to remember. Beneath it, the silenced witnesses, the boiler room fire, the half-empty boats. Beneath that, the owners who walked away dry and the lifeboats cut for looks. Beneath that, the wreck itself mapped and rusting and sealed. And at the bottom, the locked compartments no one may enter, the conspiracy that will not die, and the ocean that is still, even now, reaching up for anyone who comes too close. Most people will know the Titanic for exactly one thing. The ship that hit the ice. A few will go a little deeper into the inquiries, the insurance, the wreck, and a very few have spent their lives, and in some cases their last breath, trying to reach the bottom of it. The ocean let them get close. It did not let them all come back. The waterline is a choice. What you choose to remember about the Titanic, and what you choose to leave 12,000 feet down, in the dark, with the bodies and the unanswered questions, and the things they sealed in the hull. If this descent kept you holding your breath, subscribe and come back down with us. The next iceberg is